It's the teacher's choice today, and the topic I have chosen is um, perception. One of the things that continues to fascinate me about meditation and reflection is that it helps us notice not only the content of what we think, but how we come to think it. Now, we can assume, we often do, that we're seeing the world as it is. But much of the time, we're seeing the world through the lenses of comparison, memory, and recent experience, or actually, experience that happened quite a while ago. Our perspective is constantly changed by what just came before. And I had two, they're really kind of small experiences recently that reminded me of this, which sometimes small experiences are the easiest to actually pick up on. So, as some of you know, I recently adopted two kittens. They're about 4 months old now. So, for weeks, my visual world has been filled with tiny cats, tiny paws, tiny faces, tiny bodies bouncing. By the way, they just a few minutes ago did an acrobatic act where together the two of them leaped into the air together. But then recently I saw my neighbor's cat. She's a full-grown cat, kind of average size, full-grown cat. But I had an immediate reaction was, wow, that cat is really big. But she must have gotten much bigger, but she hadn't. She hadn't really changed at all. What had changed was my reference points. My eyes now had been accustomed to kittens, little cats. Um, and by comparison, an average sized cat looked really big. So, and then something similar happened in quick succession at the swimming pool. So on Tuesdays, I swim in a smaller pool where the swim lane is fairly narrow. But then a few days later, I went to the larger community pool. And I regularly swim in this pool, but I thought they must have widened these lanes, but they hadn't. The lanes were exactly the same width they've always been. Again, nothing in the exterior world had changed, but my perspective had. And so our perceptions are conditioned by the conditions in our life. Now, these are harmless examples. You might even think they're funny. But they do sort of easily point towards something that the Buddha spoke about, which is that in Buddhism, perception or perspective is one of the five aggregates of clinging. We don't just receive the world, we organize it, we compare it, we interpret it, we construct meaning out of it. And distorted perceptions like about the cat in the pool aren't necessarily, or things more major, aren't necessarily a problem. They're kind of inevitable. We do compare, but the problem wasn't that I thought my neighbor's cat was unusually large. The problem would have been if I'd clung to that perception. Imagine if I'd become convinced, really fully convinced of it. I might have said to my neighbor, I think you really should put your cat on a diet, or maybe you should take your cat to the vet. Something's terribly wrong. And maybe then would have reassured me that her cat was the same size as usual, and I would have insisted, no, I know what I'm talking about, not you. And now that passing perception has solidified into certainty. That's when it starts to become a problem. And the same thing happens in, much more important aspects of our life. We have an impression of someone. We do draw a conclusion. We become convinced that it's true. We stop questioning it. So something else that these stories about the cat, the swim lanes, um, illustrate is comparison. And comparison can get a bad rep. Um, we could hear that we should stop comparing ourselves with others, but it's not, comparison really isn't the problem, the enemy. We need comparison to navigate through life. Um, we need comparison. It's one of the ways the mind, excuse me, makes sense of the world. It's actually sometimes quite necessary or useful. If you go to the doctor and you're in pain, they'll probably ask whether it's better or worse than previous, better or worse when they touch you here or there. They may ask, is it sharper or duller than before? And those comparisons, or those kind of comparisons that provide important clinical information, they're useful. So it's not the comparison itself that is the problem. It's when comparison becomes entangled with what Buddhism calls the conceits. And in Buddhism, the conceits are not just I'm better than, which is what we usually in common parlance think of a conceit, but it's also I'm worse or I'm even the same. And the problem here is that we construct an identity through comparison. For example, my cats are better than yours because they're smaller, maybe a little more problematic. I'm a better meditator than you because I can sit longer. Maybe the opposite is more likely true. I'm not as good as everyone else. I'll never be as calm. It's remarkable how quickly a simple comparison can become a judgment about who we are. And that hurts. So it doesn't work to eliminate conceit by force because that this just plays into the conceit. I shouldn't have these thoughts. Everyone else is more spiritually advanced than I am because they don't have these conceits. I must be not be doing this right. So I'm not suggesting that you could eradicate or should eradicate comparison or that you could eradicate conceit. But as usual, the suggestion is to notice them with a little bit more curiosity. Because this is the thing about curiosity. When you're curious, you start to see the process. And by seeing the process, rather than being certain about, what's happening, but you start to see a process, something loosens. And then we don't have to believe every perception because it arose. We don't have to make every passing impression into a fact. Now we're inviting investigation rather than certainty. So, can I be interested in how my mind is creating this experience? Can I notice the conditions that gave rise to this perception? In other words, I never would have thought that cat was large if I did not have kittens. Those are the conditions. Same thing about the swimming pool lanes. So they remind me of how easily perspective shifts. What seems obvious today may look completely different tomorrow. Well, maybe not completely different, but somewhat different tomorrow. And the world would not have changed, the outer world, my reference point has. But that leaves me with a question that seems most important, both in meditation and in life, which is where is this perspective or perception leading me? Is it helping me become kinder, more understanding, more flexible? Or is it leading me to become more rigid, more defensive, more self-critical, more judgmental? So the perception, the perspective isn't the problem, but the clinging is. And the willingness to just loosen our grip, even if it's just a little bit, can be really one of the great freedoms that meditation and reflection offer us. So I will end the talk there, and we will sit and see what perceptions our body minds create for our usual 30 minutes.